Hey, what's up? Hello. If you're new here, my name is Kayla and you are watching Kayla's Bookish Vibes. This is going to be our July reading wrap up. I'm going to be sharing with you all the books that I read for the month and my thoughts about them. Now, I'm going to pull up my Goodreads because that is where I track my reading and my star ratings. I believe in my last monthly wrap up, I kept forgetting what star rating I gave the book, and someone commented can you keep better track of what you're rating these books? And I was like, sure, I guess. The thing about me is my ratings are very personal to me, and honestly what you all really need to know is if I liked the book or if I didn't like the book. And I think I made that very clear in the last video, but I also understand that some people are really obsessed with star ratings, so I will try to do better at giving you all my star ratings for these books. Let's scoot over so we have a place because some of these books are already packed away, like the first book, Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintira. I read this book at the top of July. This is a thriller and I gave this book 4 stars. 4 stars. I enjoyed this book. It was a very messy thriller, and because this was the very first book that I read this month, I don't really remember all of my thoughts on it. So we'll go to my Goodreads review. This was extremely messy. I enjoyed every minute of it. With friends like these, who needs enemies? It felt extremely juvenile at times with everyone and their mama, literally, sleeping around, but it made for an entertaining story. I read this on audio and highly recommend, especially if you enjoy true crime podcasts. So in this book, our main character is accused of killing her best friend. She has since moved from her hometown to live in California. In California, she has moved on with her life. No one knows who she is there, so she's able to kind of fly under the radar. And she ends up losing her job and her boyfriend because a true crime podcaster is now covering the case, and he has made an episode about her. So now her life as she knows it is crumbling because everyone is looking at her like, is she a murderer? She ends up going back home to her hometown, and the true crime podcaster is still there, and he is still cranking out true crime episodes about the case. So she decides once and for all that she is going to find out who killed her best friend, and if it was her. She doesn't even know if it was her. She woke up not remembering anything, she was just covered in her friend's blood. And we're trying to figure out, along with her and everyone else around her, who killed her friend. It's very messy though. And if you're into true crime podcasts, I think you would really like this because there are true crime episodes, especially if you listen to it on audio. It sounds like you're listening to a true crime episode of on a podcast. So highly recommend this one if you're into that sort of thing. 4 stars. Some of these books were included in vlogs, so I will leave all of those vlogs linked down below if you want to get even more in depth. But I read For Everyone by Jason Reynolds. I loved this book. If you saw that reading vlog, you know this book just kind of struck me very unexpected. I didn't expect to have that reaction to this book. As I was reading this book, it's very short. As I was reading this book, I'm just wow, this is really, really touching me right now. I think it just came at the perfect time. Every book, in my opinion, has its day. And when you're able to pick up a book at the perfect time, it hits so much differently. And this was just a book that I picked up at the perfect time. It's written in verse, so it is a poem. But essentially, it's just a very encouraging book to jump, to continue to dream, to continue to chase your dreams, not having everything figured out, and it being okay not to have everything figured out, but to still chase your dreams no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, no matter where you come from. It's just super encouraging. But it was done in such a simple way. It was very simplistic. There wasn't anything said super flowery, I think. And I think that's why I enjoyed it, because it was kind of to its core, it was just very basic, but so true. And it just resonated with me. This was just a book that resonated with me in the very specific time that I am in life. And it just the mashup was perfect. I don't know how else to explain it. I've seen so many people on Instagram, so many people message me on Instagram telling me that they watched that video and that they wanted to get the book because it made me cry. And I'm thinking it may not make you cry. If you're not in the headspace that I was in when I read the book, we all have different experiences when we read books, and this one just really hit me in that way because of when I read it. So it may not have the same effect on you, but I still think you should read this book. Get a few of these books to pass out, especially to the younger people in your life, but also to the older people in your life. I think for everyone. It's for everyone, and everyone needs to read it at least once, It was really good. I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. I know for sure I gave this one 5 stars. I also had my husband read me this book, and he was like, Jason should have been a rapper. He was like, there were a lot of bars in this book, and I agree. Jason had a lot of bars in this book, and they say that rapping is just poetry on a beat. I agree with that, but yeah, my husband really enjoyed this book as well. All right, the next book that we read, oh, I have to put it on the screen because I don't have the book out. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Yeah, I read it. I read this book and I gave it 2 stars. Hear me out. When I started my bookish journey in general, whether that be on BookTok, on Bookstagram, here on BookTube, this book is so divisive. It's just like, this author is also extremely controversial. But something about me is when you tell me not to read a book, it makes me just want to read it more. And also, when a book is super hyped, I want to know, is it living up to its hype? Like, and there are times where I feel like books are super hyped and they live up to the hype, like they're hyped for good reason. This is not one of those books. My Goodreads review literally says meh. This was such a mid book. It wasn't like absolute garbage trash, like why are you guys reading this? But it was also like very boring. And I'm just being honest. It was an extremely boring book. So I'm sure you don't need a synopsis for this book, but I'll give you one anyway, just in case. So Feyre is living with her father and her 2 sisters. Her mother has died, and for some reason she is the one that has to take care of the entire family. She is neither the oldest daughter nor is her father truly incapable of taking care of the family, but the burden has fallen on her shoulders. They used to have a lot of money, they used to be like really well off, but the mighty have fallen and now they are on hard times and she has to take care of the family. So she's hunting and she ends up killing a wolf. Well, the wolf is not a wolf and instead he is Fae. We go from there. So pretty much because she killed a Fae, she has to repay the debt with her own life and she now has to go live among the Fae. Literally most of this book is us following Feyre as she lives among the Fae. And it's just not interesting. It wasn't done in an interesting way. The only interesting part of this book came like towards the end where there was like some action going on. But that was, to me, very short-lived. And I don't know if I'm going to continue this series. But this is one of the most overly hyped books I think I've ever read. And that is not to me trying to be like, you shouldn't read Sarah J. Maas. Read what you want to read at the end of the day. Read what you want to read. But this book just wasn't a 5-star book. And I just knew this was going to be a 5-star fantasy because the way the girlies go up for that series, I just knew it was going to be amazing, and it was extremely disappointing and just very boring. So yeah, two stars on that one. Was it 2 stars or 2.5? I think I gave it 2.5, exactly 2.5. On my Goodreads, I wrote 2.5. Meh, extremely mid. Okay, the next book we read was The Ballad of Black Time by Victor Laval. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This one is also very short, and this was included in a vlog, so I'll leave that one linked down below. It only has 149 pages. In this book, we are following Black Tom. This is set in the 1920s, and this is considered like a fantasy. In this book, Black Tom is taking care of his father. He's lost his mother. He's a young man around his 20s. And he is kind of like a swindler, if you will. He walks around in a suit and carrying a guitar case. Even though he can't sing and he can't play the guitar, it's what he walks around with, and he tries to get money in that way. When we first meet him, he's on an odd job, running like an errand where he has to deliver this book to a older white lady. Once he delivers this book to her though, you can immediately tell that there's something sinister about this book. Even when he hands her the book, it's inside of his empty guitar case. He just opens the guitar case and she takes it out of the case. When she touches it though, there's like a puff of smoke and you just know that there's something going on here. So once he gets there, this man sees him with his guitar and he asks him, will you come to sing and play your guitar at my house? I'm having like a party in 3 days time. I want you to come. I'm going to pay you like $500. Mind you, this is the 1920s. $500 is a lot of money, especially to someone like Tom. Tom was like, yes, even though he knows he can't sing and he knows he can't play the guitar. He's like, yeah, I'll come do it. The guy gives him a retainer fee of like $100 right there on the spot, sends him on his way. We know then that Tom is about to get into some stuff that he really shouldn't be getting into. Tom also kind of has a feeling that he's about to get into something, but he doesn't know the extent of what he gets into. and then it takes off from there. There is magic in this book. It's kind of like dark magic. I enjoyed it though, because essentially this is just a story of retribution and revenge, but done in a way that was really enjoyable and very short. I enjoyed it because Black Tom is like a morally great character. He wants to do the right thing, but he's also human, and we as humans are morally gray. If given the opportunity, I too would have chosen the decision that Black Tom chose. I'm just being honest. So yeah, I love when our characters are not perfect, and at the end of the day, sometimes people have to pay for the decisions that they make. Okay, enjoyed that one, gave it 4 stars. The next book we read was The Deep by Rivers Solomon. Please watch the vlog where I read this book. My thoughts are very concise there. I tabbed this book, if you can tell. I tabbed it. This book brought out so much reflection for me. 5 stars, by the way. I gave this book 5 stars. I reflected so much after reading this book, and even still when I think about it, I'm sure I could pull something from it. But we are following our main character, whose name is Yetu. She is a mer person, so like a mermaid, and she comes from the Wajinru? Yes, oh, look at me remembering things. She comes from the Wajinru people, which are mer people in the sea. And the Wajinru people have this thing where they don't hold on to their past, they don't hold on to their history. They live every day like a new day in the present. They refuse to live in the past, they refuse to carry that burden. But they still want to have their history, and in order for them to save it, only one person, which is called the historian, which is our main character, she is the one responsible for holding on to all of their memories and all of their history. She is responsible for holding the history and the memories for an entire group of mer people, and it's very heavy for her. Once a year, the Wajinru people have something called the Remembrance, and that is when Yetu brings them all together and she gives them their memories back and she gives them their history back. And for, I think it's like 3 days, they have the ability to remember where they come from, remember who they are. But at the end of that ceremony, they then deposit all of the memories back onto Yetu and go on about their lives, living it like, you know, in the present moment. They no longer remember, and then they do it all again the next year. So during this remembrance, Yetu decides, what will happen if I don't take these memories back? They're killing me. Like, these memories are so heavy, our history is so hard and heavy to carry alone. What if I just left and the Wajinru people carried this history on their own? That's what she decides to do, and then we take off from there. We kind of see what would happen to the Wajinru people if they held on to their history, and we also follow Yetu. She finds out who she is without her history, because her depositing the history to them means she's no longer holding on to it, and she's trying to find herself, who she is, without holding on to that history. That is just like the very base level synopsis of this book. There's so many layers in this book, so many things that you can pull from it. Please watch that reading vlog where I discuss this book. Some things that I didn't mention in that vlog that are some things that I like kind of reflected on when I was reading this book. One of the main things, 2 things I think I'll share, but one of them was the Wajinru descend from people from slaves who were thrown overboard from slave ships when making the trip during the transatlantic slave trade. So these were slaves who were pregnant on board the ship and who were thrown overboard. And when they're in the water, they still gave birth. And what they gave birth to were the Wajinru, or the mer people, right? It's a very, very heavy origin story. But what I loved most is when we backtracked and to find out who were the first mer people, like who were the first Wajinru. They didn't know their origin. They didn't know where they came from. They just kind of existed, and they slowly started to find each other. So I think it was like a group of 6 of them found each other, and they just continued to find each other in the deep sea, where there is no light, where there is no sound, where all they can go off of is what they feel in the water. And they were just drawn to one another, and how 6 Wajinru ended up being 6,000 Wajinru, because they were able to find each other in the deep. I love that, because there is something about Black people where we're just able to find one another in any situation, in any setting. Put us anywhere, and we're always going to be able to find one another and build a community from nothing. I went to a predominantly white institution, so I went to a PWI for school, and something that I noticed very quickly is we found each other. Even in that atmosphere, we created clubs, we ate lunch together. Obviously, you go to parties together, but it was just natural. We just naturally gravitated towards one another, and you create your own community. I love that. And that's with any situation. Like, even on the internet, we are going to find, like, when you think about things like Black Twitter and Black Book Talk, there's just something about Black people. No matter where you put us, we are going to gravitate towards one another, and we are going to create a community. And I loved that. But I also really enjoyed the mother-daughter relationship that was depicted here. She tries to explain to her mother that carrying this burden, carrying the history of her people, hurts her tremendously. But her mother just thinks that she's being dramatic, and she refuses to really listen to Yetu. There is, I guess, like a character arc moments that you experience in this book, and I really enjoyed seeing the mother-daughter relationship at the beginning, what it looks like in the beginning versus what it looks like in the end. So many layers in this book. Highly recommend. When you read this book though, don't just take it at face value. Don't take everything so literally. Just try to look a little deeper, and I think you would really enjoy it. Highly recommend. 5 out of 5 stars. And I can't wait to reread this book. I actually have plans to reread this book already with one of my bookish friends that I made on the internet. So I'm excited to reread this with her. So that was 5 stars. That was probably my favorite book that I read this month. But the next book that we read, I read this on audio. I don't actually own this book. It's called Love Letters to a Serial Killer by Tasha Coriel. This was a thriller. So after reading The Deep, I needed something that was just like a palate cleanser, I guess, something very silly, something very unserious, something very not deep. And that is exactly what this book is. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. My Goodreads review says, our female main character is truly the queen of Delulu land. This was so ridiculous, but I kind of loved it. If you are in the mood for a ridiculous thriller about a true crime, serial killer obsessed woman, pick this up. Be prepared to suspend all disbelief, and you'll have a good time. I stand beside that. So in this book, our female main character is delusional. She's delusional from page 1. Do not go in trying to take this as like a very serious thriller. It's not. It's a fun thriller. She is delusional, okay, about everything in her life. So she's having trouble on the dating scene. So she thinks things are happening, and she thinks she's seeing things a certain way, and they're just not that way. So that leads to a lot of trouble in her dating life. So in the town that she lives in, a serial killer is amongst them. Like, there are women who keep ending up dead, and so she becomes almost fixated on this situation, and she's following like these true crime chat rooms where they talk about the crime, where they talk about the crime and they try to figure it out, and like a bunch of amateur sleuths on the internet trying to figure out a true crime case that's happening in real time, but it's also in her city. So the more and more the women pile up, they eventually find the serial killer, and obviously he's on trial. She's writing him letters while he's in jail, preparing to go on trial. And at first the letters start off in like you're such a horrible person, how could you do this to these women, you're an animal, you belong where in prison. It starts off there, and then somehow, little by little, she falls in love with this man because he starts to write her back, and then we go from there. She literally falls in love with a man accused of killing multiple women. But this book is crazy. The whole time I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, girl, you can't be serious. You cannot be serious. But she was very serious. I enjoyed the twist at the end. This was really just a good time. 3.5 stars. If you're in the mood for a good listen, I do recommend it on audio. I ended up checking it out from my library using my Libby app and just listened to it while I was working. But I did enjoy it. It was just very unserious. Extremely unserious. The next book I read was The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown. This is a little sci-fi horror novella, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars as well. At first, when it first started out, it was just a lot of techie talk, like a lot of sci-fi talk. And I was like, am I gonna be able to read this book and enjoy it? I had the audiobook, and I just listened to the audiobook. I easily zoned out, like very easily, because of all of the like sciencey sci-fi talk. But when I picked the book up and read it physically, I was able to track a lot better. So I read this book physically in conjunction with the audiobook, and I enjoyed it that way. In this book, our main character is Jacqueline. Jacqueline is acting as the captain of this spaceship because her father, who is the true captain, refuses to come out of his room. Even though the ship is experiencing a lot of interference, so things keep like hitting the ship, and when it hits the ship, obviously it shakes things up inside the ship, and it's just not a good thing when like outside forces keep hitting the ship. But it keeps happening, and the captain refuses to come out of his room. Now the people on board this spaceship are, I guess, the offspring of people who had to leave Earth because Earth was no longer livable. So they went to another planet to try and inhabit another planet, but they couldn't survive on that planet either. So now they're trying to make their way back to Earth. Okay, so like their offspring, their children and their grandchildren, and all of them are now trying to make it back to Earth. As you can probably assume, because the captain is not coming out of his room and the ship keeps getting hit by all of these flying objects, there's a lot of unrest going on the ship, and the people on the ship are trying to like go on strike and different things. So Jacqueline is very overwhelmed. As if Jacqueline doesn't have enough on her plate, there's also an alien of some sort, like some sort of creature that's not a human, is now on their ship. And this thing is starting to kill people. So yeah, Jacqueline has to deal with that as well. What I really enjoyed about this book, there is a droid or like an android character. I believe its name was Watson. And I really enjoyed that character because it was a robot, it was a droid, but you could just tell that it was a droid, not like all the other droids. At first you're having to try to figure out, is Watson on their side? Like, is he good or is he bad? And I really enjoyed the sinister element of Watson, and then what Watson ended up being for the people on this ship. Highly recommend if you're into sci-fi. If you're not into sci-fi, this is a book that you could read to try and see if sci-fi is something that you would like. Now this is an adult horror sci-fi, and I think I learned with this book, because it is so short, that maybe adult sci-fi isn't for me. Not that I didn't enjoy this book, but I think I only enjoyed it because it was so short. If this was like a 300-page like full-length novel, I probably would have DNF'd it. I really did enjoy the parts where we got like a lot of action. Those parts I really enjoyed, and I've realized that sometimes when books are tagged as horror, what they really mean is like there's just a lot of action scenes, and the action scenes are very descriptive, and that's kind of what we got from here. Like the gory scenes were just like when the alien was killing people, but it wasn't necessarily super like scary, if that makes sense. It was just words on paper, but it was very atmospheric as well. I will say this was a very atmospheric book, and I did at times feel like I was on the spaceship being followed by this creature, and I could almost like hear the metal footsteps. It was really good. I did really enjoy this book, but I just know that I don't think I could have read it if it was like 300 plus pages. So I think with sci-fi, I'm just going to stay within like the YA realm of it all, and I'm not going to venture too much further into the adult sci-fi. I do have some adult sci-fis on my shelf that I do want to eventually get to, but I'm just not going to like look for and continue to collect adult sci-fi novels. So there's that. All right, the next book that we finished was Glow of the Everflame by Penn Cole. This is book 2 in the Kindred Curse saga series. This book is so thick. I read it on my Kindle, though I didn't read it physically. I gave this book 4 stars. 4 stars. I think I love this series. I think I'm obsessed with this series. I'm really enjoying this series. This book, what I loved most about it was the political intrigue. I felt like it was explained in a way that wasn't hard to follow at all, but it was so intricate and still very interesting and fun to follow, because now we're trying to figure out who can we trust, who can we not trust, DM trust. I loved it. I absolutely love the political intrigue of this book. Also, the romance was still there. This is a very slow burn, and when it comes to the romance, it's very slow burn, but I love slow burn romances, so that is right up my alley. I love the tension. I love the banter between our main characters. I also love the found family that's in this book. You didn't get much of it in book 1, but you get a lot of it in book 2, and I absolutely adore our found family. Our little wyvern companion, I absolutely love her as well. What is her name? Soray, I believe is how you say the name, but it's like our little wyvern companion. She's almost like a dragon, but I love that little creature in this book. It's so sweet. I don't want to give anything away in this book because obviously this is book 2 in the series, but yeah, all of the things that I loved about this book, the political intrigue, the slow burn romance, the found family. Things I didn't like about this book though, DM made some very dumb decisions, and what annoyed me about that is she knew that she was making dumb decisions. She would literally say like,
something tells me that this is not the best idea, or something tells me I'm going to regret this decision.
And then she continued to make said dumb decision. Also, something that annoyed me about this book, there were a lot of instances where DM, or anyone honestly, would just talk over someone who was trying to give them very valuable information. And instead of letting the person talk, they would keep interrupting them, and so they would never get the valuable information. That annoyed me like nothing else. And I was like, if you don't shut up and let these people talk, they are trying to give you life-changing information. But other than that, I did really enjoy this book, and I can't wait to hop right into book 3. I'll be reading book 3 on my Kindle because it's even thicker than this one. But the synopsis for book 1. So DM is a healer, and her job is like, you know, heal humans during everyday things, like if they get hurt working or if they're sick. She's the healer. Her mother is like the head healer, and she was taught this from a very young age that she would also be a healer. Her mother, however, is the healer to the monarchy, and the monarchy are the descended. The descended are come from the gods, so they have magical powers, and they rule over the humans. But one day her mother goes missing, and DM has to take over her responsibilities as the healer to the monarchy. DM doesn't necessarily want to do this because she doesn't like the descended, right? They treat the humans very poorly. The humans live in poor conditions, don't have a lot of food, horrible clothing, things like that. Like the humans live in subpar conditions. She doesn't necessarily want to go and work for the monarchy, but she has to. DM is also part of like a rebel organization who are trying to take down the descended. So as you can probably tell, it's a conflict of interest for you to be working in the castle trying to heal this sick king, but also working for an organization that's trying to take down that exact infrastructure. So I'll leave it at that. I really enjoyed book 1. I gave it, I believe, 3.5 stars. It was okay, but this one, you could just tell like book 1 was the setup book, and this one we're really starting to get into the meat and potatoes. And I can't wait to get into book 3 because this one left off on a cliffhanger. I'm going to try to take my time with book 3 though, because book 4 hasn't been released yet, and we don't know an exact date on when it will be released. So I'm going to take my time with book 3 because I really just want to finish the series. Like, I've been reading 1 book a month, and I want to keep that up. And I would hate for book 4 to keep me from doing that because we don't know when it's going to be released. This has been picked up and traditionally published, but it is still available on KU. So if you are into fantasy romance, if you are into political intrigue and little dragon wyvern companions, the found family, all of those things, if you're into that, then I think you would really enjoy this book and this series in general. And the last book that we read for the month of July was Riot Baby. Didn't even know what this book was about when I bought it. Funny thing is, I purchased Riot Baby because I was reading The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest, and there was like a really cute scene where she's like in a bookstore on a little bookish date. They were at the bookstore and they were like recommending books back and forth to one another, and this was one of the books that she recommended to our mailman character. I love reading books about books, and then I love when those books mention books in them, because then I'm always looking up like, oh, what book is that? So I literally just purchased this off of that alone, off of a book recommendation from a fictional character in a romance novel. So in this book, we are following a pair of siblings. We are following Ella and Kev. Ella has these magical abilities where she's able to have like these visions, and she can also she just has magical powers. Okay, she can do a lot of things. We don't really get to see how she can do these things or why she can do these things. That's not really explained, and I think that's because the book is so small. So that is one of the things that I had a problem with. It was just, I felt it was very unexplained, like her magical powers. But you just go in knowing she has these abilities, she has these powers, deal with it, she has them. But she has these ability to kind of like see things happen before they happen, and even from a young child she can see like good and bad things happening to the black boys around her, even the black children that she's growing up with. She can see like what's going to happen to them in the future, and sometimes those things are just not, sometimes they're just very bleak and hard to see, even for an adult, but especially for a kid. We're also following her brother Kev. Kev was born during the 1992 race riots that spawned from Rodney King being beat in the 90s. He was literally born on that day in 1992. And so they have a very rough childhood, but they survive. They survive and they make it to adulthood, where Kev is then arrested, and we follow him as he's entered into the American jail system. There's a lot of anger in this book, especially with Ella. She experiences a lot of anger, and rightfully so. So we go with her as she processes that. Would I recommend this book? It can be confusing at times. I don't know if because I'm not really a big sci-fi reader, there were times where I couldn't tell where we were or what time period we were in, or if the things that were happening really happened, or if they were like part of Ella's visions. So I would have to like reread some things to try and figure out. I just don't know who I would recommend this book to. I am going to save this book though, and I do plan on my boys reading this book. I will be saving and recommending this book to my children when they get to an age where they can actually read it. All right guys, those were the 8 books that we read for the month of July. We had a really good reading month. We found some new faves. The Deep is probably going to be one of my favorite books of the year. Fantasy series that we've been reading, I enjoyed the second book in that this month. It was just a really good reading month. This is actually going to be my last reading wrap up in my little book nook, which is also kind of sad, but also kind of exciting. So yeah, July was just a really good month. A good reading month, a good transition month, and the last month that we'll be spending in our little book nook. We're gonna start packing these books up pretty soon. But thank you so much if you stayed until the very end of today's video. I really appreciate it. Please leave this emoji to let me know that you stayed until the very end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments below, what was your 5-star of the month? Did you have any 5 stars for the month of July? What was your favorite book read? Give me some book recommendations, and I will see you guys in my next video.